The 1970s unleashed television so dangerous that entire episodes vanished forever. Shows got pulled mid-season, cast members received death threats, and Congress actually debated banning certain programs. One sitcom caused riots in 47 cities. Ready to discover the TV that was too wild to survive? All in the Family, 1971. Archie Bunker didn't just break television rules, he took a sledgehammer to them. This CBS sitcom turned America's living rooms into battlefields where families screamed at each other about race, religion, and politics. Norman Lear created a character so offensive that viewers either worshipped him or wanted him dead. The show tackled topics that made network executives sweat through their suits. Archie dropped slurs like confetti, mocked every minority group imaginable, and treated his wife like property. When guest star Sammy Davis Jr. kissed Archie on the cheek, CBS received over 60,000 hate letters. Some contained actual death threats. What made it truly controversial was how many viewers agreed with Archie instead of laughing at him. Lear intended satire, but half the audience saw their hero. The show sparked protests in 47 cities, bomb threats at TV stations, and congressional hearings about television's moral responsibility. Critics called it either groundbreaking social commentary or dangerous propaganda. Carroll O'Connor, who played Archie, needed bodyguards after fans recognized him in public. The show won 22 Emmy Awards and ran for 9 years, but finding unedited episodes today is nearly impossible. Networks have quietly buried the most offensive moments, leaving only sanitized versions that barely hint at why this show once terrified corporate America. Maude, 1972. Bae Arthur played television's most dangerous housewife, a liberal firebrand who scared conservative America more than any horror movie villain. Maude Findlay was 47, opinionated, and absolutely fearless about discussing topics that made viewers change channels in panic. The nuclear bomb dropped in November 1972 when Maude discovered she was pregnant and chose abortion. CBS aired 2 full episodes about her decision, and America lost its collective mind. Churches organized massive boycotts, politicians gave furious speeches, and some stations refused to broadcast the episodes entirely. Over 65 million people watched those abortion episodes, more viewers than the Super Bowl attracted that year. Religious groups called Maude evil, incarnate, and demanded her immediate cancellation. Advertisers pulled millions in commercials, and some CBS affiliates received bomb threats from protesters who considered the show an attack on Christianity itself. Maude also tackled alcoholism, depression, and domestic violence with brutal honesty that left audiences stunned. She argued with her husband, demanded equal pay, and spoke her mind about politics when women were supposed to stay quiet and supportive. The show won multiple Emmy Awards and influenced an entire generation of female viewers. But those famous abortion episodes have been buried so deep that most streaming services pretend they never existed. Even mentioning their titles makes entertainment lawyers nervous about potential backlash. Soap, 1977. 6 months before Soap even aired, religious groups were organizing boycotts and sending death threats to ABC executives. This primetime parody of daytime dramas featured every controversial topic imaginable, twisted into comedy that made audiences laugh and then feel guilty about it. Billy Crystal played television's first main gay character, a role that required security guards because fans sent him actual death threats. The show tackled murder, organized crime, adultery, and religious satire with zero concern for viewer comfort. One storyline featured a character convinced the devil lived inside him. ABC lost over $8 million when major advertisers fled before the premiere. Companies like Kellogg's and McDonald's refused to buy commercial time, terrified of association with such controversial content. Some affiliates simply refused to broadcast certain episodes, creating a patchwork of censorship across America. Critics called it either brilliant satire or moral poison, depending on their political views. The show featured alien abduction, amnesia plots, and organized crime storylines that pushed every boundary television had established. What made Soap truly dangerous was how it normalized topics that families never discussed. Suddenly, dinner conversations included debates about homosexuality, religion, and corruption that parents weren't prepared to handle. The show ran 4 seasons and influenced decades of television comedy, but finding complete episodes today requires serious detective work. Networks have quietly edited out the most controversial moments, leaving behind sanitized versions that barely hint at why soap once terrorized moral guardians nationwide. The Jeffersons, 1975. George Jefferson was television's most successful bigot, a character so offensive that modern audiences would demand immediate cancellation within minutes of his first scene. This All in the Family spin-off featured a black man who hated white people as much as Archie Bunker hated everyone else. Sherman Hemsley played George with such venomous enthusiasm that viewers never knew whether to laugh or call their local news station. George called white people honkies, mocked interracial relationships, and treated his wife Louise like a servant who should feel grateful for his success. The show's treatment of mixed marriages caused massive controversy, especially when the Willis family moved next door. Tom Willis was white, Helen was black, and their children represented everything that terrified conservative America about changing demographics. George constantly insulted the family with racial slurs that would end careers today. Episodes dealing with the KKK, police brutality, and housing discrimination pushed boundaries that made network censors panic. One storyline featured George being arrested simply for being in the wrong neighborhood, addressing systemic racism with comedy that left audiences uncomfortable and angry. Critics praised the show's willingness to tackle serious social issues, but many viewers complained that George's racism was just as bad as Archie's. The character became a lightning rod for debates about reverse racism and whether comedy could excuse offensive behavior. The show ran 11 seasons and broke numerous barriers for black representation on television, but many episodes have been heavily edited for syndication. Networks removed the most offensive language and controversial storylines, sanitizing a character who was designed to make viewers confront uncomfortable truths about American society. Good Times, 1974. Behind the catchy theme song and JJ's famous catchphrase lived television's most brutal portrayal of urban poverty, a sitcom that made middle-class viewers squirm with uncomfortable truths about America's forgotten families. The Evans family struggled with unemployment, police harassment, and gang violence in ways that shattered television's tradition of sanitized family problems. James Evans worked multiple jobs but couldn't afford basic necessities, forcing the family to choose between rent and food with heartbreaking regularity. Jimmy Walker's JJ character became controversial because critics accused the show of promoting negative stereotypes. His exaggerated personality and lack of academic ambition made some viewers uncomfortable, sparking debates about representation that continue today. Episodes dealing with domestic violence, drug addiction, and teenage pregnancy pushed family television into territory that networks had never explored. When James Evans died suddenly, the show addressed grief and financial desperation with raw honesty that left audiences stunned and angry. The show's portrayal of Chicago's housing projects sparked protests from city officials who claimed it damaged the city's reputation. Some episodes featured actual violence and police confrontations that made suburban viewers change channels rather than confront urban realities. Critics praised the show's authentic representation of working-class black families, but many networks worried about alienating white audiences with stories that challenged comfortable assumptions about poverty and race. The show ran 6 seasons and influenced discussions about urban policy and social justice. But finding unedited episodes today reveals how much content has been quietly removed. Networks sanitize storylines that once forced America to confront systemic inequality through the lens of a struggling family. Sanford Sun, 1972. Red Fox turned a junkyard into television's most dangerous comedy stage, where racial humor exploded like grenades and left audiences laughing despite themselves. Fred Sanford was a character so offensive that modern viewers would organize boycotts before the opening credits finished. Fox's background in adult nightclub comedy meant his television persona constantly pushed boundaries that made network censors sweat through expensive suits. Fred's interactions with white customers featured racial stereotypes and offensive assumptions that would trigger immediate cancellation today. The show's treatment of interracial relationships caused massive controversy, especially when Lamont dated white women. Fred's reactions included slurs and stereotypes that made liberal viewers uncomfortable and conservative viewers angry for different reasons. Episodes dealing with police harassment, economic inequality, and urban decay addressed serious social issues through comedy that often felt too real for comfort. Fred's poverty wasn't cute or sanitized. It was desperate and angry in ways that challenged television's traditional approach to working-class families. Fox's improvisational skills meant live tapings sometimes included material that couldn't be broadcast, creating behind-the-scenes legends about episodes too controversial for even 1970s television standards. Critics praised the show's authentic representation of black urban life, but many complained that Fred's character reinforced negative stereotypes about African American families and values. The show ran 6 successful seasons and launched Fox's career, but syndicated versions today are heavily edited compared to original broadcasts. Networks remove offensive language and controversial storylines, sanitizing a character whose danger came from his willingness to say what others only whispered. Chico and the Man, 1974. This NBC sitcom featured television's first prominent Latino character, but Freddie Prinze's tragic real-life struggles turned comedy into cultural tragedy that networks still refuse to discuss honestly. The show paired a young Chicano mechanic with a racist garage owner, creating comedy from generational and cultural conflict that made audiences laugh at stereotypes they should have questioned. Jack Albertson's Ed Brown character constantly insulted Mexican Americans with slurs and assumptions that would end careers instantly today. Prince's portrayal of Chico sparked controversy within Latino communities because critics accused him of reinforcing negative stereotypes about Mexican American culture and values. His exaggerated accent and submissive personality made some viewers uncomfortable about representation. Episodes dealing with immigration, police harassment, and economic discrimination addressed serious social issues through comedy that often minimized real problems facing Latino families. The show's approach to cultural differences relied on stereotypes that reduced complex issues to simple punchlines. Behind the scenes, Prince struggled with depression and substance abuse while carrying the burden of representing an entire community on national television. The pressure of being television's first major Latino star contributed to personal problems that networks tried desperately to hide. When Prince died by self-harm in 1977, the show attempted to continue without him, but collapsed within months. His death exposed how television exploited minority performers without providing adequate support or understanding. Critics praised the show's attempt at Latino representation, but many questioned whether comedy was the appropriate vehicle for addressing serious cultural issues and systemic discrimination. The show's legacy remains complicated because Prince's talent was undeniable, but the circumstances surrounding his death raised questions about television's responsibility to performers who carry the weight of representation. Welcome Back, Kotter, 1975. Gabe Kotter returned to his Brooklyn high school to teach the Sweat Hogs, a group of remedial students whose ethnic stereotypes were so offensive that modern viewers would demand immediate apologies from everyone involved. The show featured Italian, Jewish, Hispanic, and black characters reduced to cartoon stereotypes that reinforced every offensive assumption about urban ethnic communities. Vinnie Barbarino, Freddie Washington, Juan Epstein, and Arnold Horshack weren't characters. They were walking ethnic jokes designed for cheap laughs. John Travolta's breakout performance as Barbarino included exaggerated Italian-American stereotypes that made some viewers uncomfortable about cultural representation. His character's stupidity and vanity reinforced negative assumptions about working-class ethnic families. Episodes dealing with urban education, poverty, and social mobility addressed serious issues through comedy that often mocked the very problems it claimed to address. The show's portrayal of remedial education made learning disabilities into punchlines rather than legitimate educational challenges. The Sweat Hogs' academic struggles were played for laughs rather than treated as symptoms of systemic educational inequality that affected millions of urban students. Their failures became entertainment instead of calls for reform. Critics praised the show's attempt to represent diverse urban communities, but many questioned whether comedy was appropriate for addressing serious educational and social issues facing inner-city schools. The show launched Travolta's career and ran 4 seasons, but syndicated versions today edit out the most offensive stereotypes and cultural references. Networks sanitize content that once made entire ethnic communities feel misrepresented and mocked. Gabriel Kaplan's Cotter character was supposed to inspire hope, but the show's reliance on stereotypes undermined any positive message about education, opportunity, and community support. Barney Miller, 1975. This police precinct comedy featured law enforcement humor that would trigger immediate investigations today, as cops joked about brutality, corruption, and civil rights violations like they were discussing the weather. Hal Linden's Captain Miller supervised detectives who regularly violated suspects' rights, used excessive force, and made jokes about domestic violence that would end careers instantly in modern television. The show normalized police behavior that reform movements now identify as systemic problems. Episodes dealing with drug arrests, domestic violence, and police corruption presented serious crimes through comedy that minimized real harm to victims and communities. The show's approach to law enforcement relied on stereotypes about criminals and minorities that reinforced harmful assumptions. The precinct's treatment of adult workers, drug users, and mentally ill suspects included humor that dehumanized vulnerable populations and normalized police indifference to their suffering. Detective characters regularly made jokes about violence against women, racial minorities, and LGBTQ individuals that reflected widespread police attitudes but should have been challenged rather than celebrated. Critics praised the show's realistic portrayal of urban policing, but many viewers didn't recognize how the comedy normalized behavior that civil rights organizations were already protesting as systematic abuse. The show's workplace humor included harassment, discrimination, and misconduct that would trigger lawsuits and federal investigations if exposed today. Characters treated serious violations as harmless pranks rather than career-ending offenses. The show ran 8 seasons and won multiple awards, but watching complete episodes today reveals how much content has been quietly edited. Networks removed jokes and storylines that would be recognized as promoting police misconduct and civil rights violations. Three's Company, 1977. Jack Tripper's fake homosexuality created television's most offensive LGBTQ representation. A character whose entire existence mocked gay men while profiting from homophobic assumptions that made audiences laugh at an entire community's expense. John Ritter's performance required pretending to be gay to avoid eviction, creating comedy from stereotypes that reduced homosexuality to limp wrists, fashion obsessions, and predator assumptions. Every joke reinforced harmful myths about LGBTQ individuals. The show's treatment of actual gay characters was even worse, featuring episodes where homosexuality was portrayed as mental illness, moral failure, or dangerous deviance that threatened normal families and communities. Episodes dealing with Jack's fake identity included situations where his deception almost exposed him to violence from homophobic characters, treating potential hate crimes as comedy rather than serious threats to LGBTQ safety. The landlord's acceptance of Jack's supposed homosexuality relied on stereotypes about gay men being harmless, effeminate, and non-threatening to straight women, reinforcing myths that denied LGBTQ humanity and complexity. Critics noted the show's popularity, but questioned whether comedy should rely on marginalized communities for humor. LGBTQ organizations protested the show's representation, but lacked political power to demand changes. The show's workplace dynamics included constant harassment and discrimination that characters treated as harmless fun rather than serious misconduct. Modern viewers would recognize patterns of abuse that 1970s audiences found entertaining. The show ran 8 seasons and spawned multiple spin-offs, but syndicated versions today edit out the most offensive stereotypes and homophobic references. Networks sanitize content that once made an entire community feel mocked and dehumanized. The Loveboat, 1977. Captain Stubing's cruise ship sailed through waters so morally murky that modern viewers would demand federal investigations into the crew's behavior toward passengers seeking romantic connections. The show normalized workplace harassment, predatory behavior, and exploitation of vulnerable passengers as romantic comedy rather than serious misconduct. Crew members regularly violated professional boundaries with guests who trusted them with their safety and well-being. Episodes featuring older men pursuing much younger women, alcohol-fueled encounters, and power imbalances between staff and passengers would trigger immediate lawsuits and criminal investigations if exposed today. The ship's bartender, cruise director, and medical staff regularly enabled behavior that modern audiences would recognize as predatory, treating consent violations as romantic misunderstandings rather than serious crimes. Female passengers were consistently portrayed as objects for male entertainment rather than individuals deserving respect and autonomy. Their stories reduced complex women to simple romantic targets for male characters. The show's treatment of workplace relationships included harassment, discrimination, and abuse of authority that characters treated as harmless flirtation rather than serious misconduct, requiring immediate intervention. Episodes dealing with mental health, substance abuse, and domestic violence minimized serious issues through comedy that prevented audiences from recognizing real harm to victims and families. Critics praised the show's escapist entertainment value, but many didn't recognize how the comedy normalized behavior that women's rights organizations were already identifying as systematic abuse and exploitation. The show ran 9 seasons and became a cultural phenomenon, but watching complete episodes today reveals content that would be recognized as promoting toxic workplace culture and predatory behavior. Fantasy Island, 1977. Mr. Rourke's Island Paradise operated like a predatory business that exploited vulnerable people's deepest desires while normalizing behavior that would trigger federal investigations and international human rights violations. The show's premise relied on guests paying enormous sums to fulfill fantasies that often involved exploitation, violence, and psychological manipulation that Rourke presented as harmless entertainment rather than serious abuse. Episodes featuring fantasies about power, control, and domination over others normalized behavior that modern audiences would recognize as predatory and dangerous to vulnerable individuals and communities. Tattoo's character reinforced harmful stereotypes about people with dwarfism, while serving as Rourke's enabler in schemes that regularly violated guests' consent and safety for entertainment purposes. The island's non-Western cultural representations relied on racist stereotypes and colonial assumptions that reduced complex societies to exotic backdrops for white fantasies about power and control. Female guests consistently experienced fantasies that reinforced patriarchal assumptions about women's desires, reducing complex individuals to simple romantic or maternal stereotypes that denied their full humanity. The show's treatment of mental health, trauma, and psychological manipulation minimized serious issues through fantasy elements that prevented audiences from recognizing real harm to vulnerable people. Episodes dealing with violence, revenge, and power fantasies normalized behavior that psychologists now recognize as warning signs for dangerous antisocial tendencies and predatory behavior patterns. Critics noted the show's popular appeal, but questioned whether entertainment should profit from exploiting people's vulnerabilities and deepest fears for audience amusement. The show ran 7 seasons and became a cultural touchstone, but modern viewing reveals content that would be recognized as promoting exploitation and psychological manipulation. The Dukes of Hazzard, 1979. Bo and Luke Duke's car wasn't just transportation, it was a rolling Confederate monument that celebrated the South's most shameful history, while teaching children that rebellion against authority was harmless fun rather than dangerous lawlessness. The General Lee's Confederate flag and name honored Robert E. Lee, the Confederate general who fought to preserve slavery, turning every chase scene into a celebration of America's most traumatic historical period. The show's romanticized portrayal of Southern culture ignored the reality of racial violence, economic exploitation, and systematic oppression that defined the region's actual history during and after the Civil War era. Episodes featuring corrupt law enforcement, illegal activities, and vigilante justice normalized lawlessness while portraying government authority as inherently corrupt and untrustworthy, undermining respect for legitimate democratic institutions. The Duke family's moonshine business celebrated illegal activity that funded organized crime and contributed to substance abuse problems that destroyed families and communities throughout the region. Boss Hogg's corruption and incompetence reinforced negative stereotypes about Southern politicians, while providing comic relief that minimized real harm caused by actual corruption in government institutions. The show's treatment of women reduced complex individuals to simple romantic interests, or helpless victims requiring rescue by male characters, denying female characters agency and complexity. Episodes dealing with environmental destruction, economic exploitation, and community violence minimize serious issues through comedy that prevented audiences from recognizing real harm to rural communities. Critics praised the show's action sequences and family-friendly humor, but many didn't recognize how the imagery and themes promoted harmful historical revisionism and anti-government sentiment. The show ran 7 seasons and became a cultural phenomenon, but modern viewing reveals content that celebrates Confederate symbolism and promotes dangerous anti-authority attitudes. Which of these controversial classics would you actually want to see revived? And here's the real question that'll divide the comments. Should modern audiences judge 1970s television by today's standards? Or does that erase the historical importance of shows that forced America to confront uncomfortable truths about itself? Drop your thoughts below and prepare for a debate.